Everyone, I see folks are trickling on. We're going to give it one more minute and then we'll get started. PowerPoint slides. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's public meeting focused on the Pacifica Beach Boulevard Infrastructure Resiliency Project. My name is Ben Gettleman. I work for Kearns & West, and we're a consultant to the City of Pacifica on this project. I'll be the facilitator for this evening's meeting, and I'm joined by two colleagues who are also supporting the meeting, Matt Marvin and Marlis Jean. Let's go to the next slide, please. And the next slide. So I'm just going to walk us through some introductory slides and our agenda, and then we'll get into more of the program here. But just to start in terms of what we're hoping to achieve for today, we do want to provide just some updates on the project, including the preliminary design process and the rationale on major design criteria and elements. We want to get back to you all on your feedback on features and amenities and how those have been integrated into the project, and make sure that we got it right and that we captured your feedback accurately. And importantly, we also want to just provide the opportunity for staff to answer questions and just to have some discussions around the project and where it's going. So let's go to the next slide, please. So here's the agenda for this evening's workshop. We'll have council members Beer and Bowles are going to provide opening remarks. Once I get through my slides, Roland Yip from the City of Pacifica is going to provide an update on the project, kind of an overview, and then we'll have Roland and then Aaron Holloway, who's also a consultant from GHD. We're going to discuss the recent storm impacts and also the preliminary design process updates. And then we'll get to the piece around the proposed features and amenities and how input's been incorporated. Have a brief update on where we're going from here, which includes the environmental review process and permitting, and then wrap it up with a good amount of time for Q&A and public comment. And so just a couple notes on the Q&A. So after each of these main presentation items, we will have some time for clarifying questions, just to make sure that all the information presented was clear. And then we'll have about 5 minutes for each one, and then we'll move on to the next presentation. And then we'll have a larger Q&A and comment period at the end. So we'll have about a half an hour set aside for that. And in the next slides, I'll talk a little bit about how we'll do the question, answer, and comment. Okay, and just some proposed guidelines for the meeting. We certainly appreciate there's different perspectives and different priorities, and we just request that folks are respectful about those differences. We're asked for folks to remain muted unless you'd like to speak. And if you're having any technical difficulties, please be patient and put that in the chat. And Marlis is monitoring that. If there's anything that's not working for you, let us know and we'll take care of it. And then again, if you have questions, please do wait for each section when we're going to do that. And again, I'll explain how to do that shortly. Okay, let's see. So I think most of us are familiar with Zoom at this point. Just a couple things we wanted to point out. Your mute button is on the left of the toolbar there. Please do mute yourself unless you're wanting to be speaking. If you want to submit a question or ask a question, there's two ways to do that. One of them is there's the Q&A feature, and you can type in your question and we can get your question that way and answer it that way. The other is just to raise your hand and we'll take a cue and answer your questions verbally. So there's two ways to do it. And then if you are interested in captions, that's an option for you as well. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded, and the recording is going to be available on the project website. The presentation will also be available on the project website. And then finally, Kearns and West is developing a summary of this meeting, and that'll be available as well. So lots of different ways to get the content and have a summary of what was discussed. Okay. I would now like to recognize quickly City of Pacifica staff and consultant staff who are in attendance, and they're available today for discussion and answering questions. We have Kevin Woodhouse, who's the city's city manager, Lisa Peterson, who's the city's Department of Public Works director. We have Roland Yip, who's the project manager, and he's the city's deputy director of public works. We have from GHD, another consultant, we have Aaron Holloway and Lucas Piper. And from ESA, also a consultant, we have Eli Davidian. So I want to just thank you all for being here today. Let's see. With that, I'd like to invite council members Mary Beer and Christine Bowles, who are both playing a critical role in advising the city and its consultant on this project, to provide opening remarks. So over to you, council members.
Thanks a lot, Ben. You took my whole speech. Anyway, I really want to welcome everybody here. It's so exciting for me to see the participant list just growing and growing and growing. I'm really happy that there are so many folks in the room tonight, and a robust outreach plan really does work. It really does help to reach as many people as we possibly can. So thank you so much for being here tonight. I do want to take a minute and thank our Deputy Director of Public Works, Roland Yip, who's the project manager, and David Harvey, the Assistant Civil Engineer, and of course, our Director of Public Works, Lisa Peterson, have put into this project. It's really unbelievable how much you've been able to accomplish, and I appreciate all of you so very much. We're going to learn a lot tonight together. I look forward to all of your questions and then the responses that come from those questions. We're looking forward to having office hours with our consultants, and so you're going to be learning about that tonight too. So there'll be time for you to check in with them if you want to do that. And now I'm going to pass it over to Christine, who's going to take it from.
Christine, we're not able to hear you. You might be on mute. There we go.
Is that okay? Sorry about that. I have a button I pushed accidentally. Thank you, Mary, and thank you, team, for all the work that has gone into this, and thank you to each member of the public for taking your valuable time to be here with us for these important discussions. I think we all know that adapting to sea level rise is one of our greatest challenges here in Pacifica. Our city council has prioritized work on this project for Sharp Park, and also work on an update to our local coastal plan, which will affect all planning and building decisions west of Highway 1. I wanted to take a minute to make sure people are aware. If you don't know already, save the date of Saturday, March 2nd. We'll be meeting at Terra Nova High School starting at 9 a.m. For in-depth community conversations about the details of this local coastal plan, the input from the Coastal Commission, and case studies of how policies would apply in various parts of town. We as council are committed to making sure our community understands these issues and has a voice as we move forward. And then for today, in the previous Seawall meetings, I read you a newly made up word for inspiration for the discussions ahead of us. These words come from this booklet, this process created for Pacificans and by Pacificans through a grant to the Sanchez Arts Center in 2020. So the word I picked today is windovator. The origin is the word wind, a current of air blowing from a particular direction, plus innovator, a person who introduces new methods, ideas, or products. So the definition the community came up with is for windovator is a species, person, or community at the front lines of sea level rise, going through the messiness of pioneering how to adapt to a changing coastline in an inclusive, practical, and empathetic way. A windovator is at the front lines and pioneers these future pathways for other communities. So I just encourage us all to have open minds and ask lots of questions as we move through the presentation today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, council members. Okay, I think we're now ready, Roland, for your project overview presentation. So let's turn to that and over to you, Roland.
Great, thank you so much, Ben, and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming out this evening. So for the project overview, next slide, please. The project is located in northern Pacifica on the western edge of the historic West Sharp Park neighborhood. The project seawall is separated into 4 segments. There's the north wall, located from Paloma to Santa Rosa. This portion is in the worst condition and has had several failures in the past couple of years. There's the pure wall system, located at Santa Rosa in the middle of the Pacifica Pier. And you can see though this wall section is has a lot of exposed sheet piles that are rusting. And then there's the south wall, located from Santa Rosa to Elder Lane, and it's in better condition than the north wall, but this area experiences a lot more of the soil that gets washed up over the wall during high tides. And then there's the south gap, and there's no wall south of here of Elder Lane. Next slide, please.
Yeah, Roland, 1 second while I get out of presenter mode here. Apologies for the inconvenience.
Great, thank you, Matt. The project goals. The goal is to replace the current seawall and outdated infrastructure, build climate resilience into one of the most vulnerable segments of the city's shoreline, improve public access and use of the beach Boulevard Promenade, create a multi-benefit solution to protect public infrastructure, recreational activities, homes, businesses, and the community at large from further coastal erosion impacts. Next slide. This is the phase 1 outcome. In June 2021, the city approved the preferred concept design. There were several concepts looked at during phase 1, which included rock revetment, beach nourishment, seawalls, and a no project concept. The hybrid alternative that was approved, shown at the bottom right of the slide, it consisted of a combination of a couple of these concepts. So a combination of 3 concepts of the seawall, rock scour apron, and beach nourishment. Next slide, please. The hybrid alternative scored the highest as a result of the meeting BBURP's objectives, alignment with technical performance, financial and environmental considerations, and it was consistent with Pacifica's draft local coastal land use plan policies. You can see the meeting polls, the hybrid option scored also the highest with the voting. Next slide, please. Currently, we are in phase 2A, and the focus of this phase is a preliminary design of this approved hybrid alternative. The deliverables for this task is a 35% design of infrastructure improvements, including the promenade features and amenities. There's the CEQA, notice of preparation and notice of completion, and then community and stakeholder engagement program. So this is our 3rd community meeting for this phase, as well as we held several office hours, and we will be holding some additional office hours. This task was all approved by the City Council on November 28th, 2022. Next slide, please. So the engineering design focus for the 35% plans are components to be informed by technical analysis and input from regulatory agencies. And this includes the seawall's height, alignment, and the type, the rock scour apron, the size and the dimensions, the natural shoreline infrastructure, placement, location, quantity, and frequency. Next slide, please. This is a timeline of the preliminary design. We are currently nearing the completion of the final 35% plans, and we anticipate finishing the notice of preparation for CEQA by summer of this year. And future phases, environmental documenting, final permitting and design, and construction are all future phases. Next slide, please. BBURP funding sources. We have $1.5 million in the California AB 74 and this funded the preliminary design, preliminary planning and feasibility phase. We also have $1 million from the Disaster Accounting Fund, and this is currently funding the preliminary phase. Next slide, please. So the potential for future funding sources. There are 3 separate funding sources that we can go after. There's our local funding, there's the state funding, and federal funding options. The engineering division is actively applying for grant opportunities, and recently we applied for a boating and waterways grant for the next phase of this project. Next slide, and I'll pass it back to Ben.
Thank you, Roland. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes for some clarifying questions on the kind of the purpose of the project and where things are. If folks have any clarifying questions, feel free to raise your hand and you can ask your question. You can also type your question into the Q&A. So let's start with Samuel Casillas. Go ahead, Samuel.
Yeah, hi. On the previous slide where you have the funding sources, could you go back to that really quickly? Because
Sure.
in looking at the majority of these sources, they are not funding or will not prioritize hard armoring, and they're looking at nature-based solutions. And they also are frowning upon, SB1 specifically said, I was on the meeting there, that they will not prioritize sand renourishment. So how are you marrying the two here because the project does include all that?
So as we approach and get into each one of these funding opportunities, we will look at the grant requirements a little bit more closely and see if which parts of our project will qualify for it. And if we do not, we won't proceed. As I mentioned, we looked at the boating and waterways grant. It looks like there is a portion of the grant of our project which will qualify. So we will go after grants which will qualify.
Okay, so you actually haven't studied which one of these will actually be available for us, is what you're saying?
No, these are just a snapshot of all grant opportunities that are out there.
Okay.
Candidates.
Thank you, Roland.
Thank you, Samuel. Let's go to Remy.
Hello. Just wanted to I'm concerned about the funding as well, and this is I think it's going to be a pretty expensive project from some of what was said in the previous meetings. But I'm just wondering if the city is really seriously looking at a assessment district, because that's probably the most fairest way to pay for this project. As it protects the immediate area around it, but the people in the north, south, and back in the valley really don't benefit from this project that much. So just wanted to see where the city's at, and maybe both of the council members, Beer and Bowles, can answer that question as well as the city manager, perhaps. Thank you.
So if there's a grant opportunity that's available, that's going to be one of the first opportunities before we look at our local funding. So if by any chance this boating and waterways grant approves our grant application for the next phase of the project, that will be what we would use first before any local funding. I think we will look at it as we approach the next phase of the project at the end of this year, what we will utilize.
Okay, thank you, Roland. And then I think we're going to move on now. I just want to acknowledge that a question was submitted in the Q&A. And the question was, is the rock scour apron similar to the riprap used on Esplanade Beach? And the response was provided in the Q&A. So correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I think people can go into the Q&A and see the response.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, let's take one more question. Nikali, you need to unmute yourself.
First off, very well pronounced. I am so impressed. Nobody ever gets that right. Secondly, so I recognize that we're looking at these grants, but do we have to consider the California Coastal Commission's thoughts on everything in order for these grants to actually get approved potentially?
That would depend on each individual grant application. So if there's a requirement about needing some coastal input with the grant application, then we will provide that with each grant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roland. Okay, I'm going to suggest that we move on to the next agenda item, where I think Roland is going to talk a bit about the recent storm impacts, and Aaron Holloway as well. We'll cover that, plus preliminary design process updates. So back to you, Roland.
Great, thank you, Ben. So I'm going to start off with the December storm impacts to Beach Boulevard. There were approximately $170,000 in damages from 3 breaches that we had this winter. So there were holes that were breached underneath the walls, and we had to fill it with slurry, and then also restore any of the flat work, whether it's asphalt or concrete. And then these seawall breaches also caused closures of Beach Boulevard, just for safety concerns for the public. So the seawall and the Pacific Pier, they're interconnected. You're going to need Beach Boulevard in order to access the Pacific Pier. So the seawall is needed for the protection and access of the Pacific Pier. There was also significant flooding that damaged storm drains and washed sand onto Beach Boulevard. So we have had to, have had field services staff come in, and you see them out there just trucking a lot of the dirt and doing a lot of excavation in this area. Next slide, please. And then these are the impacts to Pacifica Pier. The high tides and large waves damaged sections of the pier's west-facing deck and the concrete railing, some more than it did from the previous years that we had to come in and put that temporary fencing in order to open up the access to that L portion. But this additional damage caused the pier to be closed until February 14th. We recently reopened around half of the pier, and so we're waiting for the remaining storms to pass so we can do a structural assessment to determine how much of the pier can be reopened. And next slide, and I'll pass this to Aaron.
Thanks, Roland. We just wanted to put some of these recent events into context, with data we have from the CDIP program measuring nearshore wave heights at Pacifica. So this is at a model observation point just at the Pacifica Municipal Pier. It just shows the 20 largest wave events that have been recorded since 2000. So we can see the January event was pretty high on the list, second highest in the last 20 years, just behind the December 2015 event, with a wave height of 25.5 feet at 18 seconds. That also coincided with a high water level, greater than 7 feet for more than 3 hours. Fortunately, it did not occur at the highest of high tides. It occurred with kind of a normal spring tide, and there was some storm surge and other elements contributing to a higher than predicted water level. But again, similarly in the December 28th event, the wave height was smaller, but again, we had water levels above 7 feet for consecutive hours. And so that combination of waves and water levels is really what contributes to damage to the wall, flooding, and also a lot of deposition of sand along Beach Boulevard. So when we look at this chart here, we can see that, the years 2002, 2006 all had several large events. Those are, years where the north wall sustained significant damage. Again, the 2016 year, significant damage to the north wall, and on we go. So this is something we've seen in the past, but yeah, we've had, 2 very large wave events in this last year. The next slide, please, Matt. Primary issues, as many of you are aware, flooding from wave overtopping that gets over the wall, across the promenade, across Beach Boulevard, and many times, accumulates at low points in the streets or flows to the south and kind of accumulates down along Clarendon. The second key issue is erosion and undermining. This is most prevalent at the north wall, where the material behind the wall is piping out from underneath it through the rock and resulting in these kind of cavities that excuse me, open up behind the wall. This is an example of one in early December this year, or last year, that was repaired. So next slides I'm going to go through is the kind of updates on the preliminary design and how the proposed project would mitigate these primary issues and how would they fare in these kind of events. So the first thing I want to show is just the layout. So this is a plan view of the project reach and the location of where the existing wall is and where the proposed wall is. So north of the pier, we're proposing an alignment very similar to the existing wall. In most cases, it'll be just behind the existing wall. We're proposing a few locations at San Jose Avenue and then near Paloma, where the seawall would be aligned slightly, pushed slightly seaward to facilitate coastal access and provide kind of a viewing platform. As we get to the pier, around the pier, we propose to build a new wall encompassing the existing pier wall. And then as we go further south, we propose to relocate this wall further landward, away from that active coastal zone. A couple of different reasons for that, but saves cost, allows a lot of that coastal processes, the wave run up, the overtopping to occur on the beach, and relies on the beach to dissipate a lot of that energy rather than having the wall out on the beach. And when waves come over the wall, they bring all the sand with it and accumulate on Beach Boulevard where we don't want it. So that's one of the key reasons there. We've had a meeting recently with Coastal Commission staff and walk through some of these design concepts with them and the rationale. They obviously viewed the south wall favorably in that the seawall will be relocated further landward. They had voiced some concerns about the north wall and in particular where we're going to be pushing seaward, but they do recognize kind of the access and the amenities. So that's kind of an area we'll be working on some alternatives to, stay within or behind the existing alignment while still providing, a similar amenity. And Luke's will talk more about that later in the presentation. So I want to go through a couple different slides showing typical sections at A, B, and C. So section A, we're north of the pier here. And the key difference here is that this existing wall is going to be replaced with a deep pile foundation so that we don't have the problem of material piping from behind the wall underneath the wall. We're looking at a steel pipe pile filled with reinforced concrete as the primary structural element. The top of the pipe or the top of the piles will have a concrete pile cap that'll be shaped to have a recurved face on it to help deflect some of that wave run up back to the ocean and reduce flooding on the promenade and Beach Boulevard. The wall elevation will be about 4.5 feet higher than most of the north wall is today. So that will accommodate, 2 feet of sea level rise while still reducing the run up during some of these extreme events. Go to the next slide, section B. This is at the pier wall. So the new wall will encompass, it'll be aligned roughly 10 feet outside that existing kind of deteriorated sheet pile. So some of that will be removed. The new piles will be driven and kind of that pier deck will be expanded out with a similar kind of concrete pile cap to achieve our design crust elevation. And then the gap in between will be filled with a concrete slurry. And then the south wall will be the location where the wall is relocated landward along Beach Boulevard. So we're looking at a promenade and a bike path kind of alongside where that parking area is now. That'll be founded on kind of a compacted embankment. And we're looking at a step wall or some kind of feature where there will be a backstop kind of at the back of that beach, and it'll accommodate kind of varied sand elevations because the sand level does vary out there depending on storm events, tides, water levels, sea level rise, et cetera. So we want to have a wall that kind of can tolerate some of that variability in the beach profile. And we're proposing to place not only additional beach sand as part of the project, but also incorporate some more cobble particularly along the stretch to provide further shoreline erosion resistance and wave run-up dissipation. So we think this is going to be an effective solution at not only reducing the frequency and amount of wave overtopping, but it'll also allow a lot of that, wave run up to occur on the beach, and the beach building activities that typically occur during these like large storm events. They will all occur like seaward of the wall, rather than kind of up and over the wall onto the kind of plaza and beach boulevard like they do today. Next slide, please. So the other piece we're going to be incorporating into the project is some improved drainage. So the wall is going to be higher. That's going to help obviously reduce wave overtopping, but it's not going to eliminate it entirely. So we do anticipate during these large events, there is going to be some overtopping along the promenade and beach boulevard. And so we propose to incorporate some drainage beneath the promenade and then also on beach boulevard. So beneath the promenade, there'll be kind of a slope to the promenade and then inlets and the storm drain below. That storm drain will kind of run parallel to the seawall, collect in manholes that will also be tied into the catch basin system along Beach Boulevard. And we think there's opportunity to increase the size and maybe the number of catch basins to help alleviate the flooding that occurs along and landward of Beach Boulevard. So on the north wall, we have enough elevation difference to where this storm drain system can function and kind of convey any overtopping flooding back out to the ocean. As we move further south, that gets a little tricky. So on the next slide, we show a photo of the recent flooding from the January event, where Beach Boulevard essentially turns into a river. So there's a lot of overtopping that occurs in the vicinity of the pier. And because of the slope of the road, it all kind of flows south, accumulates down near Clarendon, bringing a lot of sand and debris with it. So as we lose elevation on the road, it becomes harder to drain by gravity back out to the ocean. And so in this case, we'll be looking at, collecting this in inlets and catch basins and tying into the existing storm drain system at Clarendon, which is, there's planned upgrades for and improvements to that collection system and eventually a pump station to pump out through the existing outfall. So that's going to be the primary approach to draining flooding along the south wall. And again, as we talked about earlier, the realignment of the wall and some of the design of these features along the promenade and planter strips along that parking lot will provide opportunities to kind of, and if that wall does overtop, it'll slow down this overtopping so some of the sand and debris settle out before it gets across to the road to reduce the chance of kind of silting in and clogging of these inlets in the storm drain system. Next slide talks a little bit about sea level rise. So there's a recent guidance update. I guess it's a draft form released January 19th. It's expected to go final June of this year. And so there's some updated projections. The biggest difference is that the projections have lowered over the next 50 years. If we look out to 2100, the projections don't look a whole lot different than previous guidance, other than the H++ scenario has been removed. That was the 10 foot at 2100 scenario from the 2018 guidance. So this is what the new science says. It basically, we're not going to change the design approach at this point. We're talking about building in 2 feet of sea level rise initially, with the some additional improvements to reach 3.5 feet, or to accommodate 3.5 feet of sea level rise. So that's still the design approach. The new guidance indicates that's likely to occur further out in the future than the previous guidance, which is good news. But nonetheless, sea level rise is happening, and it will continue to happen, and will be a key thing to consider as the design moves forward. I think that wraps it up. So.
Okay, thank you, Roland and Aaron. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes for questions, and just want to acknowledge that there have been some really great questions submitted through the Q&A feature, and just want to thank Nick from GHD who's providing those responses. So just encourage folks to take a look, because there's some really helpful responses in there. Samuel, looks like you have another question. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I see actually two questions. The first one would be, I see that you're studying quite a bit just, westward of the wall, but what is the study going to be for the geology basically from Beach Boulevard to Palmetto Avenue or beyond? Because my understanding that's all sand, and also the hydrology that's involved with that as well. Because one of the, what triggered me to ask that question was you showed that actually the wall was breached behind. So what's the plan to actually do a hydrology report as well as a geology report for what's between Beach Boulevard and Palmetto Avenue?
No, I can speak a little bit to the geology. We did collect borings along Beach Boulevard, so we have a good feel for what that subgrade looks like and the different layers we're dealing with along the project area. The project did not involve investigations further landward than that. So not sure at how to answer the question as we get further toward Palmetto. And I know the city has also looked at the storm drain system, and their storm drain master plan considered upgrades in the area. And from what I read, it sounds like most of the upgrades are focused on that the southern reach of the project in the Clarendon vicinity.
And then also, this is the first time on the south part where I saw that catch basin there. I'm not sure about that. How would you actually prevent that just being flooded with sand? Because that's what's happening to all the drains along there now in Beach Boulevard, that they get flooded with sand when it comes over. So
Right.
it would kind of be a moot point.
Yeah, so the increased wall elevation we're talking about is certainly going to reduce the amount of sand that gets over the wall. Also, the different alignment is going to help that a lot. And then if we do get overtopping beyond that, and it does get across the promenade, we're going to have, there's going to be additional kind of barriers behind that, small little seat walls, planter boxes, that kind of thing to allow this overtopping to kind of settle, to slow it down so the sand can settle out before it gets to that storm drain system.
All right, thank you, Aaron.
Okay, let's go to Cindy Abbott. Go ahead, Cindy.
I had to find the unmute button. So I have two questions. On the north end of this seawall, it looks like the plan is that there will be no beach remaining there with how the project, the picture shown looked. So can you talk about that? So again, what is the state of the sandy beach north of the pier with this project as currently proposed? And how does that impact with that bigger wall, the folks in the Shoreview neighborhood that is adjacent to it? Since seawalls tend to significantly deflect water up, and the water already comes more than 5 feet high during storms. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question about the beach nourishment, and it's still part of the project, and we're still evaluating that. Part of the phase that we're in is kind of the early numerical modeling to evaluate the effectiveness of how much sand would it take and how long would it last. But that is part of the project. The graphics we showed in this presentation are more of kind of a storm event situation. And even with beach nourishment, we expect there to be, during storms, and with the seasonal winter wave events, there probably is not going to be sand north of the pier. So I think that situation will remain. But during calmer times when the beach recovers, then we expect to see a benefit from that nourishment, and where there'll be more sand available in the system.
And that's only with nourishment?
Yes. So we think the nourishment element will help.
Okay, which will probably wash away in one storm. And then the deflection for the entire area and Shoreview?
Yeah, so the deflection is a good question, and seawalls, do impact wave energy. So they're going to deflect it seaward in most cases, and sometimes at the ends, where the wall curves back, it could deflect to adjacent properties. So that's a topic that gets evaluated in detail, especially during the CEQA phase, where we're really evaluating all potential impacts from the project. So that's really kind of going to be a focus area for the next phase of work as we get into the CEQA process and developing that environmental document.
Okay, I see a couple hands, and I'm mindful of the time, so let's hopefully we can get through Sherry, Remy, and Kurt, and then I'd like to move on. So let Sherry, why don't you go ahead?
Hi there, Sherry Chan. Yeah, actually, Cindy partially stole that question. I had the same question about the adjacent neighborhoods, both Fairway and our friends up in Shoreview, because I mean, just the wall that we're seeing now, I mean, it's pretty clear that this force is just going to be shooting straight up northward. Yeah, some of it will go deflect back into the ocean, but a significant amount, I mean, every study that I've seen has shown that this force is just going to be pointed straight northward, right towards Shoreview. And I'm just trying to figure out what we're going to now do to protect Shoreview now that we're creating a new problem. And have we outreach to that community and the IBL school community and the Pacific States communities as we continue and strengthen this particular seawall at this particular little spot? Shoreview is already under, quite a substantial amount of risk. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. Okay, let's go to Remy and then Kurt, and then we'll move to the next presentation.
Hi, just wanted to comment whether the engineers have worked with the Coastal Commission, because it's my understanding last one had beach nourishment on the north side, and the Coastal Commission, I think initial conversation was buying off on that hybrid plan. But from what Aaron is saying, that it's not practical now to have any beach, due to the wave movement. So I'm just wondering what's the conversation with Coastal Commission, because if they don't approve it, we basically have no project, and this whole exercise is a moot point. Thank you.
Thank you, Remy.
Do we want to go to Kurt? Ben, how much time do we have left?
Yeah, let's take Kurt as our last question, then we'll move on. Go ahead, Kurt.
Hi, this is Kurt Keast, and my concern is that appropriately we're raising the level of the wall because that's what the wave overtopping is about. But in so doing, we've basically obviated the concept of Beach Boulevard as a visual promenade. The pedestrian portion would be elevated and would be a great amenity, but the vehicle portion would be at best just access for people to their for the individual homeowners to their driveways. But the idea of driving down Beach Boulevard with a view of the ocean would be completely useless behind a wall 4.5 feet higher than its present. In addition, the several parking spaces that are basically meant for people to pull up and spend 15 minutes looking at the ocean would again be useless. And so it would seem to me that the project should acknowledge that and instead make the pedestrian promenade bigger, wider, maybe more amenities, benches or vegetation, or possibly move it inland a few feet to make the Coastal Commission happier about approving the north portion. It just seems irrational to do an expensive wall that turns the Beach Boulevard into just a chute behind the visible ocean. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, so thanks, Kurt, and perfect timing for the question, because that's what we'll all be presenting next.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a great segue to the features and amenities presentation. So thanks for teeing that up for us, Kurt. I'm gonna turn it over to Lucas to go through these slides and just invite folks with their hands up to put those down, just so we know.
Great. All right, thanks, Ben. And you know, like Ben said, Kurt lined it up perfectly. So hopefully I can hit it here. So, you know, as everyone's well aware, this is the third amenity, or sorry, third public outreach that we've held. So if you go to the next slide here, as such, we've had a few opportunities to receive feedback from from all of the citizens here. So first, I want to provide a summary of what we've heard, and as we move forward in the presentation, we'll talk about how that's integrated into the current design, and then also look at how those views are going to be impacted based on how the current design is on that raising of the seawall, the promenade, and the impact at the road and promenade level. So the main kind of summary of points that were brought up in previous engagement opportunities was a real desire from the community to have this promenade be connected. That's both north and south, connecting to the shoreline, as well as connecting to the community in the development inland. There is also a desire for providing multimodal use of the space, so bicyclists, pedestrians along the promenade, vehicles, and with that vehicle, Kurt brought up the parking. So that is a consideration and feedback that we've received previous about wanting to maintain or providing additional parking and where strategically where those could go. There's also been a talking point regarding the regarding the location that this is at and the impacts from the salt spray, the corrosive nature of that environment on the material choices. And then as we kind of zoom in on the next slide here to specific feedback for that North Plaza, there was, again, kind of common themes here with the enhancement of views. There is a specific request about integrating public art opportunities in the paving, in the seawall, different art structures or sculptural elements. There's discussion about providing multifunctional use of the space. With overflow parking, that's a tricky one because the space, even though it's currently being used as a parking overflow, it's on a private lot, so there's some conflict with available space for use for those kind of things. And then there's desire for providing additional furnishings such as additional seating, integrating that in with the design, and providing this kind of viewing platform as opposed to just a circulation path of the promenade. If we go to the middle pier section, we receive feedback regarding a desire to remodel the existing bathroom at the Chit Chat Cafe. So providing a permanent restroom facility at that location instead of temporary facilities along the length of the promenade. And then also looking at enhancing that visitor experience with the promenade design, seawall design, with access to the pier. There's also desire for creating slowing down of vehicles with tabletop features and other kind of crosswalk features to connect the community. And then also looking at pedestrian safety. At the southern end, you know, there's been previous conversation about, you know, developing this as more of a park area. And I think as such, there's feedback regarding the previous designs that we've shared, looking at wanting to incorporate different park-like elements into this area. So looking at different planting areas, public art opportunities, play structures, picnic tables, and also maintaining or adding additional parking down at that southern end. If we go to the next slide, another conversation that we brought up on the September engagement opportunity was we're soliciting feedback regarding the themes and how the theme can influence the look and styling and material choice for the different furnishings and amenities that will be selected for kind of backfilling that space. So as you can see here, the main feedback that we received was it was a preference for a more bohemian coastal aesthetic, with the modern theme being the preference when it comes to railings and fencing. And we'll touch base on, I'll at the end of this section of the presentation, I'll show our current status of what materials and furnishings we've selected that represent this feedback that we received. So on the next slide, so looking at the whole corridor running from Paloma Avenue at the north all the way down to Clarendon on the south, trying to unify this promenade with different furnishing stylings, planting areas, accent for view, different plaza drop downs. So we have a circulation network that's tied in with these more passive viewing opportunities to get off that circulation, consolidating parking. One thing to note here is that you know, there was a conversation Kurt brought up about being able to park along Beach Boulevard. We've strategically aligned where we have some parking, so we actually increase the total number of parking spaces. And when you're up at that north end, so by Paloma Avenue there, you're actually, the seawall is currently up at that higher elevation. So as Beach Boulevard goes from Paloma down to Clarendon is where the elevation is dropping on the roadway. So at that northern end, you're actually maintaining those same views that you currently have. The promenade isn't going to obstruct those views. It's not going to be 4 feet. How it's designed currently. It's once you get kind of towards the middle sections and then further south, especially on that southern end where we're going to be more and more impacted from the road view. Looking at this overall view, I want to highlight those blue dashed boxes. Those are the north, the pier, and the southern plazas. So we'll talk about those locations in detail. The yellow dashed are cross-section and view impacts that we'll highlight as we move forward. If we go to the next slide, this is the North Plaza here. So it's fairly similar to what we provided in the past with utilizing that kind of step down viewing plaza. We have incorporated different paving and art opportunities, showing different planting areas as well as furnishings and amenities, and then rearranging the steps going to the north to the small beach at the northern end. One thing I want to highlight with all of this is that these designs, they are preliminary, they're conceptual, they are evolving, and they're evolving based on the feedback that we receive, but also they're going to be evolving based off of the you know, the different agencies and environmental review process with CEQA and from the Coastal Commission. To that note is on the plan here, you can see that red dashed line running from left to right. So that's the existing alignment of the seawall. So one thing that we may receive in terms of feedback is a hesitancy to push that seawall further ocean, you know, towards the ocean. So how we've designed these plazas, we've designed them in a way that if we receive feedback like that, and if we get held to pull this wall back, we still maintain the same amenities, but they are just limited in overall space. So if you go to the next slide, so looking at this from a 3D visualization, you can see that step down aspect of the plaza at this northern end, providing some planting buffer behind that's protected with that wall structure to help with the wind, and designating a space and separating the different movements between the plaza movement or the promenade movement and the viewing plaza for more sitting and relaxing, and integrating the steps with seat walls and providing additional seating and access. Going to the next slide, you can see a cross section that kind of further shows that step down effect of the plaza and the development of these different space creation of that northern area. Important also to note that these plazas and everything of the promenade will be designed for a universal design for all modes of access and abilities. So going to the next slide, Going to the visual impact conversation, there have been noted and identified important coastal views as part of the Sharp Park specific plan. As we move forward, as we go down further these slides further in the presentation, we're going to be identifying kind of key viewpoints and how the views will be impacted. So at the northern end, on the next slide, you can see that as a cross section, as I mentioned before, the road will relatively be at the same elevation as the promenade. So it's important to note moving forward as we look through these slides that at the northern section, that promenade and seawall are equal to the road. But as we move south, that promenade and seawall will remain static and relative to one another up at that heightened seawall elevation. However, the road, Beach Boulevard, will be dropping. So we will have impacted views from the road as we, more so as we move south. But at this northern section, our views will be limited in impact. You can see on the left here, we're showing a railing. At some locations on the northern end, we'll be able to provide railing. But as we kind of move south and potentially as we get up towards Paloma, we might then use that seawall as a parapet or, as that fall barrier to help draw down that promenade and kind of step down that elevation change. So in the next slide here, you can see the existing views at this location. So looking straight out to the ocean and looking north to where that new plaza is currently designed. So right now you're level with the plaza or with the promenade, and you're looking out through the railing. Going to the next slide. This will be what our current design shows. At this, I want to highlight on the on the right slide or picture there. We're showing the seawall at this location. Like I said, these are preliminary visualizations. This could eventually turn into a transition of railing, so you'll have a better view out. Looking at the picture on the left, visualization is looking down into that plaza area, so you can see as it really widens out, and then preserving that driveway easement access on the right there for the private parcel back behind. So going to on the next slide, looking as we go further south, so looking at that Pier Plaza location along Beach Boulevard. So this is kind of between San Jose Avenue and Salada Avenue. Again, we're using the idea of having this kind of terrace drop-down viewing platform that's off the circulation network. And things to note on this, you can kind of see to the left there, that orange vehicle. It might just look like an orange blob, but that's where an example of where we're consolidating parking. So we're able to pull out the promenade for a majority of its length and then consolidate parking at key locations, because at this location, the promenade's up higher in elevation than the road. So we want to consolidate parking strategically to allow access up to the promenade. You'll also notice here that we have that green strip between the road and the plaza. So we're introducing some landscape planters to help accommodate for that raise, that change in elevation. If we go to the next slide, you can see the visualization of this. So a similar kind of bump out feature, providing ramping down and steps down to this lower viewing platform, providing kind of this double barrier with the seawall behind or with the wall in front and the wall behind, while maintaining that elevation on that back wall for that protection against the wave, increased protection. And on the next slide, you'll see from the view looking from the road in to that plaza area, you can see where that landscaping will provide that buffer space. So you can see the road is lower than the promenade at this location. Where we're handling that transition of grade through that planter. If you go to the next slide, kind of keying in on the visual impact, again, looking at in relation to the Sharp Park master plan on the important views. you can see that this is in an area that was identified on that plan as a view corridor. So going to the impact of that view in the next slide, you can see how that cross-sectional look at the plaza or at the promenade in the road at this location. You can see that we are picking up about maybe 3 feet at this location, 2.5 feet from the road to that plaza height, and then using that the seawall, or what we're calling a retaining wall here, that goes up to that 30-foot elevation. So being able to kind of step down from the designed height of the seawall down to the promenade and then down to the road. So again, as you move south, your views from the promenade out to the ocean will not be impacted. However, your views along the road will be. You can see this in on the next slide, the existing view at this location. So looking out, is that Slada looking out? You can, how the current design is with that seawall is that it's dropping in relationship with the road. So you still have the same view that you had up the north end. It's a view out through the railing to the ocean. Looking at the next slide here. So as you can see on this slide, since we're picking up that plaza and the seawalls remain constant and the road dropping, that those views will be impacted more so from the road elevation. Going further south on the next slide, looking at that southern series of different plazas along the promenade. We have the beach nourishment and pulling of the seawall back and allowing for opportunities for these 3 separate plazas. The one on the north end of the south area is what we're calling a play plaza. So taking the feedback from previous engagements and looking to introduce some play structures and amenities down in the southern end. The middle area there is a picnic plaza with both those having access to the beach. And then at the southern end, having a transitional roundabout space to kind of bookend and transition over to the trail going south and tie in the seawall to the berm. So going to the next slide, we have that southern play plaza. So again, zoomed in on here, you can see we have a separated designated bike lane to provide some buffer from Beach Boulevard up to the promenade, introducing a widened out area to have some structural play elements, as well as seating opportunities integrated into the seat walls. And you can see on the left there, that brown area is a transitional placemat, if you will, to transition from the sand onto the promenade. And you can see that better in the next slide here that shows that transitional space and the play, the rubberized play surface in the background to have more enjoyment and different type of activity along this promenade. If you go to the next slide, you can see how, from looking from the street in, how that retaining wall structure is higher. Again, we're getting higher and higher as we move south, but trying to buffer and mitigate some of that impact with planting and with different design features. There may be opportunity on this wall to provide some mural art or some other type of feature to kind of enhance and minimize that impact. Going to the next slide. Again, going through our assessment of the view impacts. This is another important view corridor, and this is the one that will be impacted the most with the current design. So going to the next slide. Looking at the cross section here, you can see at this South Play Plaza, we have some stepping down and some sloping we can play with. So, but views from the road out to the ocean, they'll pretty much be fully, impacted as we go from this point down south. However, the views along that plaza and promenade, you'll have unrestricted views to the ocean. Looking at it from a existing street level view, you can see how it is right now. I'm sure most of you are all very familiar with this area. That seawall's further out. And then on the next slide, you can see how we are pulling that seawall in, but in doing so, we're raising it and providing this obstructed view at the road level. If we go to the next slide, you can see here the picnic plaza, again, using that decking feature to allow for a transitional space up to the plaza where we bump out and allow for picnic opportunities, seating opportunities, and allowing for maintaining the parking and access to ramp up or step up to this plaza, and then the additional features and amenities, furnishings that we're adding to this location. Looking at that from on the next slide, you can see a cross section of that. So as we go further south, we're getting higher up in elevation of that promenade, which is the incorrect way of saying that, because the promenade is actually not raising, it's the road dropping. On the next slide here, looking at that southern gap. So the current design as we have it uses a seawall to tie into the berm on the southern area to close that gap. What's interesting about this location is we're using that roundabout to transition from the promenade level down to Clarendon Road elevation, the road elevation. So at this location is a unique area where that seawall, or the step wall, I think as Aaron called it, will act as almost like a freestanding wall on the promenade side. So both pedestrian and road vehicle at Clarendon Road elevation will be impacted here. So if we go to the next slide, you can see that from a cross section. You can see how on the left where it says promenade, where the people are standing and sitting on the seat wall, you can see how that's a little bit higher. But then as we go around that roundabout and back to the promenade where it says promenade on the right, where the guy is stepping down, we're dropping the promenade there. So as you move down, you're transitioning to a different elevation to meet that existing road. So that's what I have to share for the design as it is now, and the impacts on the view. The next slide is as I teased at the beginning, is looking at the current status of the material and furnishing selections based on the feedback we received on kind of the theme, and how that portrays itself with the material choices. The materials were selected based on their resiliency and based on their style. So you can see a few different types of furnishings here. And then on the next slide, some additional furnishings with trash receptacles, picnic tables, seat walls and seat toppers along that seat wall. And then the railing where we can provide those at that northern section. And that's the end of my section. I'm happy to pass it back to Ben.
Thank you, Lucas. And again, just want to acknowledge there's a really good discussion happening in the Q&A, and thank you all for your questions and your comments, and thank you, Nick, for your responses. And so I'd encourage folks to take a look at that dialogue, and that's going to be captured in our meeting summary as well. Nikoli, let's turn to you for your question.
So I just wanted to follow up on Remy's question from earlier. I mean, all of this sounds really nice, and the idea of having a promenade is amazing. I mean, I definitely would love to have that in the community, but it seems like we're still not fixing the root of the issue, which is really the seawall. And it seems like it really would cover a pretty short expanse of the coastal, the coastline that really does affect kind of what Cherie was referring to earlier with the sea view or Fairview points. And I'm a little concerned that we're spending a lot of time thinking about aesthetics rather than actual function. And I'm curious, I understand that this is kind of a hybrid thought, but I mean, have we dug or thought any further about doing something like a levee or a dam? Because there's also comments in the question section about kind of a blowhole effect with the way that we're thinking about drainage. And I can't help but agree. And considering Highway 1 is so close to all of this, if the Palmetto and all that area does flood, and it will based on both rains and the rise of sea levels, what we should really be considering is how much time could this potentially take to impact Highway 1 and really what's connecting the community to the rest of the state.
Or anyone wanted to respond to Nicely's comment, or we can certainly take the comment and appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. Yeah, I think the city has obviously done some studies and planning in that regard. They did the sea level rise vulnerability assessment. We looked at the entire city. They've prepared an adaptation plan. They're preparing a local coastal program update. So a lot of those hazards have been evaluated. At least in the project area that I'm most familiar with, the time for Highway 1 to be threatened is far out in the future. And I think we're talking. I think we looked it up to 6.6 feet of sea level rise in phase 1, and I don't think it wasn't anywhere close to the highway, at least in this project area. I'm not sure about other areas of town though.
And kind of going along with this proposal to push out the promenade towards the sea, how would that work if really the CCC isn't even really open to the sea wall plan as it stands, and there's such a, kind of back and forth on that?
I'll just touch on that real quick. So during, I think that first, the northern area, and I didn't touch on it on the southern or the middle pier plaza, but we have designed these in a way with that understanding that, we don't know exactly what we're gonna receive, but we've designed in a way to accommodate and allow for being able to still provide those amenities if we receive comment to pull that wall back. It will limit the space, but will still provide the same access and viewing areas. And also, I think it's really important that we show a lot of really nice graphics here. That looks like a really well thought out design, and it is, but it is conceptual, and as this is still evolving. So, and we're prepared to handle that moving forward with the design.
Thanks, Lucas. Let's go to Samuel and then Cindy, and then I'd like to move us on to the next presentation. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's really more two comments. The first one's simple. I mean, I think it's a kind of a waste of time to put plants there. I mean, I don't know how much you're looking to spend, but I heard earlier that there's still going to be overtopping. So that's salt water going into those plants. The first time you get salt water into those plants, everything will die. That's the first comment. Second one is I have to push back on the feedback, some of the phase 2A feedback that you guys are saying. A lot of the feedback that was actually been consistent is not captured here, which is not just access to the beach, but actually preserving the beach, the cost of moving the sewer pump versus cost of the wall, and then also looking at nature-based solutions and building in manage retreat options and buffer zones. All that's not caught in here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Samuel. Let's go to Cindy, and we're going to move on to the next piece here.
Will agree that I'm very concerned that a lot of these images are showing things being softened with plants. I live in the area. Things don't grow there. Let's be realistic. Trees and things are just going to be inundated with salt water. So I'd really like to understand more of that, and who is going to maintain all of that as well. It looks really significant. It's never worked in the past. I'm also very interested in that northern area, the northern plaza. That's the only access to 1567 Beach Boulevard. Is the city buying 1567 Beach Boulevard? You're putting a lot more people in that area where right now it says don't even stand here. And that's the only way to get to that property. And the stairway that's proposed there goes to rock. And you've already said there will be no beach there in all likelihood. So a lot of questions about that Northern Plaza area. And it's also the area that has the most overtopping and has historically had the most overtopping on Beach Boulevard.
Okay, thank you, Cindy, for those comments. But I do want to move us to the next presentation. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Matt. So this is future project activities, and Eli from ESA is gonna tee it off, and I'll touch on some next steps as well. So go ahead, Eli.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everybody. Eli Davidian with Environmental Science Associates, and I'm going to talk a little bit about next steps in terms of the environmental regulatory process, and specifically, I'll talk about the environmental review and permitting. Let's go to the next slide. Thanks. So we'll start with the state environmental review process under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. We've talked a little bit about some of these concepts throughout the presentation, but I'm going to kind of take us back to basics, and so we all kind of have a common understanding of some of the things we've been discussing. So under CEQA, state and local agencies are required to consider and disclose to the public the environmental effects of a project before approving the project. For this project, the city will be preparing an environmental impact report, or an EIR. And the EIR will focus on the physical environmental changes that could result from the project. Under CEQA, an EIR is required to identify mitigation measures that would avoid or minimize significant adverse impacts of a project. And finally, an EIR is required to consider feasible alternatives that might reduce environmental effects, while also meeting most of the basic project objectives. So importantly, the alternatives need to be feasible, reduce impacts, and be and satisfy most of the basic project objectives. The next slide. So this slide shows kind of a busy diagram of the typical CEQA process, and I'll take it color by color here. So we'll start with the top left with green icons. We'll initiate the CEQA process through publication of a notice of preparation, or NOP. And that document will announce the city's intent to prepare an EIR. It'll include a brief project description, and it'll explain how to provide comments on the scope of the environmental review, and including any public meetings that'll be held for that. The NOP review and comment period typically runs 30 days. And after that time, the city will review all the comments received and prepare the draft EIR. So now we're moving to the blue icons. Once the draft EIR is prepared, the city will publish a notice of availability, or NOA, and that'll announce the availability of the draft EIR. It'll summarize the project and potential effects, and provide details on where you can access the document, how to provide comments, and any public meeting information. So the draft EIR public review period typically runs about 45 days. And after that period, after the close of the draft EIR review period, the city prepares the final EIR. So now we're moving to the orange icons. The final EIR will include responses to comments on the adequacy of the environmental document, and it'll show any revisions to the project description or environmental analysis that were initiated by the city or developed in response to public comment. So once the EIR is prepared, the final EIR is prepared, the city holds a public meeting, or more than one meeting perhaps, depending on interest, and decide whether to finalize the EIR, certify it, and approve or not the project. So, but again, the EIR needs to be certified before the city can make a decision. The city needs to consider these impacts of the project. And so moving to the next slide, what are the impacts? What are the topics that are going to be considered? These are the range of topics that are typically considered in the CEQA process. There's a lot here. CEQA prioritizes topics that based on the level of potential effect, the presence, public interest and that sort of thing. And so not all of these topics will get the same level of attention. Obviously, we've heard a lot about aesthetics and views that will get more attention. Other topics like wildfire, at least along Beach Boulevard, not a huge issue, so that won't get as much airtime. Moving on to the next slide. The project will require approvals from a number of other federal and state agencies. So a list of the agencies whose approvals are likely to be required is provided here. The Army Corps of Engineers has jurisdiction over the ocean and developments that would occur below the high tide line. National Marine Fisheries Service has jurisdiction over marine habitat and species. Regional Water Board has jurisdiction out to 3 miles offshore, water quality considerations there. State Lands Commission has interest offshore up to the mean high tide line. And finally, we've talked about the Coastal Commission has jurisdiction within the coastal zone, all of which this project is included. So the permit applications are typically submitted around the time the draft EIR is published. And as I mentioned, the CEQA needs to be completed before any state or local agencies can take action on the permits. So let's go to the next slide. And so it's been mentioned a couple times here that the coastal development permit is needed. We're in the coastal zone, and so clearly a CDP is going to be required. But the project is a little unique since it includes some elements within the Coastal Commission's retained jurisdiction. So those are generally the waterside elements, and then there's other elements which are in the city's local coastal program jurisdiction. So those are generally the landside components. And as a result, when you have a project that kind of splits across those jurisdictional lines, you'll have the Coastal Act policies and the LCP policies being considered during the permit review. As you may also be aware that, and we've talked about this at the top of the meeting, that the city is updating the local coastal land use plan covers shown here on the bottom of the slide. And some people have asked, what about the relationship between the project and the LCP process, and whether the LCP could affect the way the project is shaped, or whether the project can be approved. And the short answer is that the project will be evaluated under whatever policy document is certified at the time. So if the LCP update is certified, then that will be the document that's considered during permit review. If the LCP update has not been certified, then the existing LCP will be considered. But generally speaking, the LCP policies flow from the Coastal Act policies. And so a project that is consistent with the Coastal Act will most often be consistent with the LCP. And so in summary, I guess the status of the LUP, the update is not really expected to affect whether or when the project might be approved. If the document is certified and provides some really specific detail about what the city wants to see at Beach Boulevard, it might further inform the review process, but it's not expected to really be a determining factor in whether this project is approved or what ultimately looks like. And so just going to this last slide here to wrap up, here's a rough timeline of the likely environmental review process, beginning with as I mentioned, the publication of the notice of preparation, and then working down through to the issuance of permits. As you can see here, the process typically takes about 3 years. It can be longer, it can be shorter, depends on the complexity of the project, the amount of interest, engagement by public, by agency staff, and ultimately the agency review process. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to Ben, and happy to take questions as folks have them.
Thanks, Eli. Okay, I've just got one slide, and then we'll open it back up for questions and comments. And just in terms of next steps, materials for the project current phase are available on the project website. Really encourage folks to take a look at those and sign up for the email list. We use that list to provide notifications of what's coming up. So encourage you to do that. In terms of the upcoming engagement opportunities, as a few folks have mentioned, there will be an office hours session coming up in March. That date is still TBD, and we will notify folks through the virtual communication channels. So just keep an eye out for that. But that's, again, another opportunity to ask questions of city staff and consultant staff to continue the discussion we're having here. And then, as Eli had mentioned, the public CEQA meeting coming up in sort of spring, summer timeframe, and we'll again send a notification as soon as that's scheduled as well. So just want to make sure those are on folks' radar. Okay, so yeah, so I think I see a few hands, and we're opening it up, really spending the remainder of the meeting focusing on Q&A. So let's go to Rob. Excuse me. Excuse me. Let's go to Remy.
Hi. The question that I had previously really wasn't answered regarding the coastal, the plan on the north side not really being in line with the Coastal Act in terms of doing the hybrid plan. So I'm just wondering, what's the process as far as modifying the design on that side of the project. And secondly, that one lot that's at the end of the north end of Beach Boulevard, wondering if it could have access through kind of the back alley behind the two apartment buildings that are adjacent to it. And if that happens, then that entire frontage could be pedestrian, and it'll probably help mitigate, the whole coastal access issue, on that side of the project. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I will say that the city and the design team have met and will continue to meet with Coastal Commission staff throughout the design process and through CEQA permitting. So as Lucas mentioned previously, this is a conceptual design. We've gotten some preliminary feedback on what staff is looking for, gotten some initial reactions. Certainly, we're well aware of the Coastal Act policies, and a lot of their review is going to be balancing sometimes competing policies of the Coastal Act, like the need to protect infrastructure while also providing public access. And so, as we work through the design process with the commission, I hope and expect that we're going to arrive at a project that is most consistent with the Coastal Act, that does balance those competing interests of things like maintaining beach, maintaining public access, and while also providing the needed protection for existing infrastructure. With respect to specific design ideas or design modifications, I'm not really the best person to speak to that, and it may be premature to talk about modifying the design at this stage, just because we've presented the concepts that we have to date. But those are good points, and we'll note them, and I'll just maybe offer it up for anybody else on the team to respond if they have any responses.
Thank you, Eli. Let's go to Samuel.
Yeah. I mean, you can start calling me Sam. I feel like we've been spending so much time together. So,
okay.
Anyway. So, a couple of things here. I guess in looking at the planning here, it said something like 2027 on that one slide. Where would we be slotting in the Coast Commission review? That's one thing. And also, what is the interaction with the city of San Francisco, their sea level rise department, as well as GJNRA? Because we know that the seawall is going to have a deleterious effect on the beach on Sharp Park Beach. So what has been the engagement with them? Because that timeline is great and all, but it's not taking sort of outside considerations of coastal commission review, feedback from the Sea Level Rise Department of the City of San Francisco, and GGNRA. So what has the engagement been with those other two agencies, and where in the timeline would we be considering the Coastal Commission review of this?
Yeah, good questions. I can speak to the moving forward. There's been quite a history of this project and coordination and collaboration with adjacent property owners, and the city, maybe city representatives would be better able to speak to those. But I'll take the second part about moving forward. Now, this group has a pretty robust agency engagement plan, and so as I mentioned, we've already started meeting with the Coastal Commission staff, and we'll continue to do that through the advancement of the design, the notice of the scoping process, and the public review stage of the EIR, where we expect to initiate permitting. Ideally, it will be at or before the release of the draft environmental impact report. We want to give them enough project description detail so that they can understand what's being proposed, while also giving them an idea of what the implications are from a coastal resource standpoint. And that's about the earliest stage that we can engage them meaningfully in terms of coastal resource impact standpoint for the permitting.
Okay,
and that
I guess that's my question, because are we actually being realistic in that time frame there for the amount of review that the Coastal Commission is going to have? I don't know, that slide didn't really point that out.
Have specifics. No, that's a fair point. So I would say that for a project of this type, a year and a half to 2 years is probably the right amount of time to get through the permitting process. So, assuming that we got through to a public draft EIR in a year and a half, then I could see the permit applications going in around that time, and then having another year and a half or so to work through the permitting issues. But you're right. I mean, it can be longer. It really depends on whether there's agreement between the agency and the city about what the priorities are, and whether the staff or the commission are comfortable recommending approval for consistency with Coastal Act policies.
Okay, thank you, Eli.
Sure.
Let's go to Summer.
Hi there. Actually, this sort of dovetails with that last question. It sounds like this is going to be 5 years plus for construction. And I noticed the city's doing less and less management of this area. And so what is the plan between now and the construction of the wall? And then I have a second part of the question also about costs. When will we get these updated estimates of the costs of this project?
Good. Thank you.
So
I can comment on the management of the area. So in terms of the staffing level for our field services division, it's very limited. And recently with the past few storms and the recent years, the overtopping and also the breaching of the wall is occurring more and more frequently. So we're devoting a lot more resources just to clean up the area, and also to repair storm drains and deal with all the breaches. And so, with the maintenance, we're not able to handle that as well as we have in the past.
And then the question about when will we get an updated estimate of the costs of this project?
So I believe with the currently the estimate for the construction is at $80 million. We will have an updated estimate when we finalize the plans and specs for the project. and that will be with one of the upcoming phases.
Thanks, Roland. Okay, let's go to Clifford.
Hello. My basic question is, all this stem from preserving the infrastructure. How long will this project preserve that infrastructure? What is the lifetime? What's it going to cost? And to save that infrastructure that ultimately will not be saved by this project, how long will it take to implement that project? When will that project in seeking right-of-ways be initiated, or has it been? How long will it take? This is going to take a lot of money. And your very nice drawings kind of show these areas with wood boards or whatever. How, I mean, do you think it's only going to take one day for the sand to obliviate this? I'm sorry, but why are we pouring so much money and effort into something that is going to disappear so quickly, and the original effort to preserve the infrastructure be defeated? Ultimately, it needs another answer. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment, Kurt.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, we want everything. We want to protect our shore with a hybrid seawall. We want a beautiful promenade, but we also want views, and we want to include view parking and a view boulevard, and we want coastal amenities, we want food trucks, we want bike lanes, etc. But we can't have everything, even if we had money. Making a list and asking for public input about everything we want doesn't really accomplish breaking the laws of physics. There is not enough space. This isn't about money. There's not enough physical space for us to put all that stuff in. And by adding a 4.5 foot taller wall, which is what we really need because we're trying to protect us from the sea, we basically created an obstruction that we're ignoring. And so I request that the 3D renderings that have been done for this with the graphics be redone, setting the cursor at eye level in a car, which is about 4 feet. If you do it, the futility of including any version of view from a car would be eliminated, and you would just have a narrow street for access, and you'd have more space for a promenade. There's no reason to have those 4 or 5 parking spaces, which really now are used as view parking. You park and you look at the beautiful ocean. Those are completely oblivious in the new construct. And I would say that on the South Promenade, a lot of the similar thing would be done. Just redo the 3D views, and everyone will go, oh, why are we bothering? Yes, we need a seawall if we're going to try and protect stuff. No, we don't need to include things on our wish list just because we're breaking the laws of physics. Thanks.
Thank you, Kurt. Let's go to Eberhard. I think you got to go off mute. Okay, let's go to Jim Kramer and we'll circle back.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep. I want a clarification on the role, on the interactions with the CCC staff. A number of people have said, and I don't think it's as widely appreciated as it should be, how important the reaction of the CCC is to the process.
And one wind, and it'll be.
Oh, sorry, we need some folks to go on mute here. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
So I'm going to continue. Yep. So Coastal Commission approval and their reaction to this project is so critically important. I was pleased to hear what I thought was said, which was that that there is direct consultation between the engineering firms that are doing the planning and the Coastal Commission staff. I just would like to clarify, is it true that GHD and ESA engineering personnel, the consulting firm personnel, have interacted directly with our representative who handles specific at the Coastal Commission or other Coastal Commission personnel? Or are we talking about sort of indirect connection where the city communicates with the CCC and they pass information in two ways between the consultants?
Good
Thank you.
question, Jim. Yeah, I'll take that. So the consulting team and city staff are meeting with Coastal Commission staff directly. There's not a firewall or the indirect line of communication. We are scheduling the meetings. We're meeting with staff. We're going to continue to meet with staff through the project.
Thank you. That's good news.
Yep.
All right, thanks, Eli. Let's go to Sherry.
Hey there, Shuri again. Still Shuri. So I think about 5 minutes ago, I heard something. I wasn't sure if I heard you correctly. Is the projection from this project team that this entire project is going to cost $80 million? Like, I heard something and it was a little muffled. I wanted to make sure I had that on the record somewhere.
That's correct. That has been shared before, that the construction cost currently is at $80 million. And there was a question in the Q&A. Someone looked up on the federal website about our BRIC grant that we are shortlisted for the construction for $15 million. So we're awaiting final approval before we announce that. But someone looked up and put in the Q&A there. So I'd like to share that as well, along with other grant opportunities we're looking for the next phases of the design.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Kurt, you still have your hand up. So please put that down if you no longer have a question. Sam, let's go to you.
Yeah, Roland, I would like to actually see that analysis, that it's going to cost us $80 million for the seawall and the sand nourishment, the hybrid, and then everything else that we're asking for here. I find it fantastical that it would only cost us that much. And then if we don't get the grants, we're going to have to do a bond measure that would increase. One of the last estimates that I actually saw from somebody down the coast was this project could end up costing us $500 million. So that's obviously a long way from 80 million. So anytime that we can actually see the analysis, I think it would have been very helpful here to actually be able to dive into that so that we can have a nice cost comparison. So when will we actually see that analysis? And on top of that, why aren't we actually looking at what it would actually cost to do the seawall and what it would actually cost us to move the sewer pump? Because that's what we're really getting after here. But I want to see the full analysis. The pretty pictures are nice and all, but when will we get the full analysis?
Sure thing, Sam. I mean, I believe some of this was, at least the higher level numbers were shared in previous community meetings. So if there's further detail that you're looking for, we can touch base after this meeting, and let me see what GHD can provide here.
Yeah, Roland, I can add to that. I think the costs were evaluated as part of phase one when we were looking at the different alternatives, including for this hybrid alternative. So there is a lot of information posted on the city website with the cost estimates for those different alternatives. I believe that estimate was refined when the city put together the FEMA BRIC application. And so the stuff posted for phase one may not be the latest and greatest, but Roland's correct. I think the latest estimate that was prepared for the BRIC application was about $80 million of construction cost. And so that's kind of the working number right now. But this phase of work, once we have the preliminary plans pulled together, we're going to do an updated quantity estimate, an updated cost estimate, and a lot of that information will be available to the public.
Okay, so Aaron, to that point, I guess at what point are we going to have some sort of trigger that says, okay, if 80 million ends up being 150 million, then 150 million ends up being 200 million. What's the trigger for the feasibility of this project not to move forward in this capacity? At what point do we say, hey, gee, that's a pretty big number?
So I believe we've looked at the cost, and I just want to clarify on the cost in 8 million, because I think we've shared some additional numbers for the additional sand nourishment and O&M operation and maintenance in the future there. So in terms of the cost, I think we've shared numbers for 100+ million that includes operation and maintenance with a cost of no project cost. So those two numbers have been shared with previous meetings in phase 1, and I believe the no project cost is higher by a decent number here.
I don't think we're asking about a no project cost. I think what we're talking about is actually physically moving the sewer pump, and that's what we need evaluation, not a no project. We're actually talking about what would a manager tree plant cost. That's not a no project cost. And also what would, and putting in nature-based solutions as well, and looking at those. We're not talking about no project costs. The no option is not an option. We get that.
So
the true valuation of that, so we can do the analysis.
Aaron, is there any? Oh, sorry, Sam. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, Aaron. I don't know if there's any additional information we can share still in terms of what was looked at with the no project cost. I believe my understanding was did look at some moving of infrastructure.
Yeah. Part of that estimate evaluated relocating and configuring the whole sewer system, the water supply, power, and other utilities. But it also took into account the cost. If you do that and you don't protect your shoreline, then you're going to lose your road, you're going to lose your pier, you're going to lose the homes. And so all of that stuff was accounted for and would be a cost, So when you say just the cost of the sewer, well, that would solve the sewer problem, but not all the other problems. So we tried to look at it holistically, like, okay, here are all these important things in this community that we would like to preserve. What is the cost if you lose all those? And so that's
sure,
what that
I get that
phase one. That's how the phase 1 study was.
Sure, I get that, but in reality, I guess what I'm also looking at here triggered. I was going to ask this question, forgot. We're going to lose that anyway, sooner or later. So what are the projections there? Because I believe the projections are that you're using for sea level rises 2050. Is that correct?
No, we're looking at, projections throughout the end of the century. And the projections vary depending on the scenarios we're looking at.
2100. So the League of Coastal City, the League of California Cities, or whatever that organization said, is we should be using the high estimate for that. I don't really see that here. I mean, I think we have to really think about, okay, if we're not going to, the cost estimate of saying, okay, well, we're going to lose the houses and this and that, I understand that, but that's going to be a reality regardless. So what are we looking at? This seems like a short-term plan. So what are we looking at for a long-term plan? I think somebody asked it earlier. What we have to at some point look at actually moving the infrastructure because of the fact the sea level rise is real. I think everybody in this forum agrees to that in some way. So anyway, are we looking at what that true cost of that's going to be from a short-term standpoint and a long-term standpoint, and what it's going to cost to actually move that stuff? Because we're going to have to do it anyway, sooner or later. Correct?
So Sam, that you made a lot of statements there, and I'm struggling to follow, to be honest. But regarding sea level rise, the projections vary. The high projections you talk about that would be catastrophic and would overwhelm everything are, really, really, really unlikely. Like less than 1% chance of happening in 100 years from now. So those scenarios are not the ones that we're trying to design for. We're trying to design for the likely range, recognizing that we will learn a lot and it could be higher, and that would result in some additional triggers. And a lot of this stuff is going to be evaluated as we proceed with conversations with Coastal Commission and additional analyses and tying it to the long-term plan. So I think
so we are going to put triggers.
Guys, Sam, this is Ben. I'm mindful of the time here, and I think there's a lot of back and forth, and I think we're getting some of your questions answered, but I'm also mindful of everyone else here. And so I just want to check here and see if other folks have questions that we can get.
I don't see any other hands up.
Yeah, right. And I'm checking. Hold on, Sam. I'm checking. I'm checking with others.
Something here, Ben. Aaron. So there will be triggers.
Sam, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to mute you because we need to make space for other people. So let's go to Remy, please.
Hi, just, it wasn't quite answered, but I did have a question. If we need to look at the signing cost of what we're protecting. There's a portion that's protecting the private houses. That portion should be allocated to a special assessment. And of course, the portion that protects the roadway and the public infrastructure, that could be a public bond measure. So in the end we really need to have really clear idea on the estimate of the stuff that we're protecting, so we can come up with a fair and sensible funding solution. Thank you.
Thanks, Remy. Okay. Just want to see if there are any other questions. I guess just acknowledging the volume of questions coming through the Q&A, and wanted to see as those come through, if there's any of those we want to highlight that haven't been answered yet. Again, all these responses that have been provided will be in the summary, as will the discussion that's been happening verbally. So I guess I just defer to the team here to see if there are any. And well, before we do that, why don't we go to Nikali and to Jim? And I think at that point will probably be a time to adjourn here and check in on next steps. So Nikali, go ahead.
So is there still a debate as to whether we're going to go the managed retreat route or the seawall route? And if so, where does that stand, and what's kind of the estimated timeline to get to a clear decision on that? And then additionally, if it is the managed retreat route, or the seawall route, whichever, how would that impact homeowners in the area?
So the study of the options were performed on phase 1, and the no project / managed retreat option was evaluated against several of the other options in my previous slides, and the hybrid alternative was the one that was approved by council. So right now we are specifically talking in phase 2 here about the specifics of the design, the amenities. So we're no longer discussing whether or not to still do a no project option at this time.
Thanks, Roland. Let's go to Jim.
I guess this is going to end up being more of a comment than an actual question. It was a follow-up. It was quite similar to the previous question. A number of times tonight, we've been told that other options will be considered, and both for the CEQA and EIR stuff, we got to consider realistic alternatives. I don't feel that we're being told. I don't trust what we're being told. I think it's very clear that the only options that's being considered seriously is a bigger, badder seawall. And case in point, in the original proposal that GHD prepared, they included a range of options that they proposed to consider. And when it came time to write the final report, instead of the final proposal, instead of the sort of advanced guard of what they proposed to propose, then those options were removed. It's really clear that when you say quote unquote managed retreat, and nobody really knows what's meant by that, and no action, that's not really the only possible additional alternative. I'm very worried that we are not allowing our competent engineers to consider a realistic range of truly viable alternatives that would be much more likely to get approval and would cost less. I think the chances that this is going to get approved through the Coastal Commission with tangible and commensurate mitigation, which is required by the Coastal Act, just seems so vanishingly small to me, the Plan B idea and that we need another option on the table, being honestly compared seems to me seriously in absence.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
I
can
agree
I-
with that. I'm sorry, I know I didn't raise my hand and I can barely see because I'm in a car, but I just want to, my name's Dr. Waxman. I lived in Pacifica since 01 and I haven't been on many of these calls. I do, however, live near the coast, and I was recently in Isla Vista. The whole boardwalk is, the homes are falling into the sea. So no matter what we do here, that is what is going to happen. And I don't know how it's, evaluated that maybe the city or the monies that are spent on an $85 billion project are actually given back to the people who would be most impacted to relocate. And then we come up with some realistic solution that the couple hundred yards from the shore, at least, that is going to become sea again, become sea. And it breaks my heart that apparently is not still on the table.
Okay, thank you, Norma. And Eli, I saw your hand. Did you want to respond to it?
Yeah, I just wanted to address Chip's question. I wanted to just acknowledge that and to let you and other folks know, as you may already know, that part of the Coastal Commission's review and authorization, in fact, the statute requires that shore protection be the least environmentally damaging feasible alternative. So that your point is a good one, and I think this team is seriously considering it, and it will have to as it works through the Coastal Commission review process and conversations with staff. So I just wanted to acknowledge that point.
Thanks, Eli. Kimberly, let's make it the last, maybe Kimberly and Jim, and then we're going to wrap up. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Ben. As I'm listening to this, I just want to say, and by the way, I represent San Mateo County chapter of Surfrider. We've been involved. I personally have attended all of these meetings from the beginning. And as many of you know, I'd like to say that ESA and GHD, I really want to thank you because I have appreciated your honesty throughout this process. It's a very long process, and you've handled it very well and excellently, and your knowledge and honesty have just been much appreciated. What I see is that the city has limited what you can approach and what you can do. And in fact, the early consultants on this acknowledge that fact, that the city placed limitations on what sorts of options you could pursue and present. So I think we should remember that that was part of this. And then I'd like to revisit some of what Sam Casillas said. The city really needs to, in tandem with this, pursue a long-term plan for moving infrastructure inland. That's just something that is going to be less costly if you start it early and you do it over a long period of time. And all of this needs to be planned for, and not planning for it is just not doing right by the residents of Pacifica. And all the best consultants in the world are not going to be able to change that reality. In fact, they could help you with this planning process over the course of 30 to 50 years. So I would like to encourage the city again to pursue long-range planning for moving infrastructure inland, and to face the reality that all the seawalls in the world will not last forever, and the higher the seawall gets, the less enjoyable the coast is. And right now, you're looking at no beach in front of those areas, north and south, and possibly erosion of the beaches adjacent and further down in Pacifica. And that's a tragedy. So thank you for listening to my comment, and I appreciate the work that you've done on this.
Thanks very much, Kimberly. Jim, final question or comment of the evening?
Thank you. I'll be very quick. We haven't mentioned at all tonight the idea of the public trust lands. The cities and private owners cannot own the part of the coast which is where the water wants to go. To do that is against federal and state law. And the CCC can give a temporary waiver, but it has to do it only under certain very stringent conditions of mitigation. We do not have a legal right to protect our property necessarily because it's a very well-established federal law. So public trust doctrine is something which is foremost in a lot of these deliberations. And I just wanted to say that because it hasn't been mentioned tonight. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And I realize we're a couple minutes over time, and just want to acknowledge that. And want to thank everyone for their participation. This is I think a really helpful discussion, a lot of really good questions that were both asked, verbally, and then it looks like over 60 questions that were submitted through the Q&A feature. So Kearns and West is going to consolidate all this, so we'll include the whole Q&A discussion that's going to be captured in the meeting summary, as well what was discussed, and that will be posted to the project website when it's available, probably in a few weeks. So please keep an eye out for that. And then again, on the next steps, the office hours where more discussion can happen and questions will be in March, and we'll let folks know when that's going to happen. And also just, we'll be notifying on the environmental process and the initial scoping meeting. So please stay tuned for that. So just want to thank all the presenters and thank you all for spending your evening, working on this important project. And we look forward to seeing you the next time. But thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you.